Welcome back to Sika Strength and welcome back to Sikistan. Today I'm going to be taking you through the system I used to take one of my lifters, Jamie, to a 330 kilo back squat at 90 kilos body weight, a 320 kilo deadlift and a 210 kilo bench press. Now Jamie started this year with lifts of 275 kilo squat, 175 kilo bench and a 287.5 kilo deadlift. He then ran the Sika Powerlifting program on the Sika Strength app and he went to 317 on the squat, low bar, 190 kilo bench press and a 305 kilo deadlift. Jamie then approached me and mentioned that he had a very large competition coming up this year and he wanted to take it as far as he possibly could for this competition block. Jamie had a couple of issues before we started the block, which is where I'll usually start when we do one-to-one coaching. We kind of get into the background and see is there any issues that may arise later. Jamie had a meniscus surgery and an ACL graft and some dislocated shoulders from the sport of diving. Now, just before we keep going, Jamie is a bit of a freak athlete. I would never tell him this, but as far as units go, people who are predisposed for athleticism, strength, power production, Jamie is one of those great athletes. But you'll still be able to use these principles in your own training because they're the same all the way down to your first 100 kilo bench press, your first 120 kilo squat. So let's start with the squat. The first lift we hit was a 330 kilo squat with wraps in competition as a 90 kilo lifter. The main way we supported this back squat was by the high bar squat. Now this is something we've used quite frequently and we've never actually touched on this in a video, and I'm going to do a different video on this. The low bar is something that is very, very hard on the body. It's very fatiguing. It causes a lot of issues, as you'll see later in this training block. The low bar is something that can be really egregious in its insults to your body. So one of the best ways to get better at low bar squatting is just to take a couple of steps back in terms of specificity, but not too many steps back. And one of those steps back, the closest one you can get to it, the one that we find the most useful, is the high bar squat. And we use this to support that low bar squat. It's less fatiguing, it's less prone to pains and aches and injuries. The high bar squat is something that once you push it up, generally you'll see that if you use a particular style of low bar squat, that the low bar squat will go up with that if you keep pushing that high bar squat. So in Jamie's case, we started with a 250 kilo for 3 high bar squat. He would have pushed this from the Sika powerlifting programs. So he would have already had a bigger high bar squat and been used to this style of training. So this helped immensely in this particular training block that he'd already run our style of programming. So in regards to this, he had a 250 kilo by 3 squat on the high bar and a 315 kilo low bar squat in competition. Now the goal here was to do sufficient volume to actually move that low bar to get a lot of work done, and then potentially, if needed, actually hit that heavy single. So the heavy single on the high bar squat isn't actually fully necessary. The high bar squat is something that the work done is the most important part of it. Doing the actual heavy single at the end of the block won't give you any major benefits for your low bar squat. So you don't ever actually have to peak your high bar squat for powerlifting. Once you do that initial training block, you get that volume in, then it will produce the results in your low bar squat. And that's exactly where we started. We came in twice a week with a high bar squat. We started with multiple sets of 8, 6 sets of 5, 5 by 8. And for the first 4 weeks, we kept those 8s in. And this is running off the back of some recent videos we've made talking about how useful high volume training is for a lot of lifters. So we got this high volume in, and then we started looking at the technique of that high bar squat. And we knew that if we improved this technique on the high bar squat, this would then translate to the technique of the low bar squat, or at least the way we would coach the low bar squat. Now the high bar squat required a few changes for Jamie. We needed to change his wrist and forearm angle, so this was too vertical. It was a little bit too loose. We lacked enough thoracic extension throughout the lift, so as he squatted down, we were seeing a bit of a flexion in the upper back, which is an issue in regards to keeping that torso upright. It'll cause some issues later on heavy weights. So we need to produce a bit of rigidity in this forearm angle here with this wrist and elbow position, and then more extension, or the minimum maintaining the amount of extension we start the lift with throughout the full high bar squat. Lastly then, we're looking at a really forward knee angle, so pushing those knees forward and keeping that chin angle forward as Jamie came up out of the bottom of the hole. Now we pushed this pretty far. We actually got to a 285 kilo high bar squat in sleeves, which you'll see on the screen there, and it was excellent. Jamie threatened to do a 301 kilo squat and I wanted him to do that. I suspect he probably could have done a bit more, but a 300 kilo squat would have been enough for his particular low bar squat goals for this particular training block. However, Jamie's knee was quite sore towards the end of this training block, the same knee that we had the meniscus and ACL repair. This is something I would expect, and for that reason we obviously didn't max the high bar squat. That 285 single was a PB and that was enough. Both of us wanted the max, but of course Prudence needed to happen, and we didn't end up going for that heavy single because in the last 5 weeks, we had that knee issue arise. So from there, we had to make sure that we weren't jeopardizing the low bar squat. So we didn't push that high bar squat. But in the future, I'm sure we'll return for a bigger high bar squat, given just how good at high bar squatting he is. Now, that high bar squat was also supported with some assistance exercises. Mainly, this was with the zombie grip heels elevated front squats. These stayed into the program the whole way through. These are exceptionally useful as a quad specific exercise. We could also use something like a belt squat, which we were a big fan of. But the reason I use zombie front squat, heel elevated front squats, was because I also wanted Jamie to practice that upright torso and maintain that position with a little bit of load. So we didn't push this too far, and we wanted to push the fatigue pretty far in those specific areas at the start of the program because we wanted to force a bit of a stimulus and adaptation. So we use these moderately high reps, and if they're ever too fatiguing towards the end of a session, or if there was any knee pain or an issue, we would drop them and it wouldn't cause any major issue. As long as we were producing some progression on the weights, on these zombie split squats, we would be in a pretty good place. So we pushed these as an assistance to the high bar. The high bar then remained as an assistance for the low bar. Now, about 12 weeks out, we reintroduced the low bar squat. This was a little bit further than I would normally do, just 2 or 3 weeks, maybe, depending on the lifter. In this case, I didn't particularly know how good Jamie's transfer from high bar to low bar, how long it took, how long did he take to adapt to low bar squatting. So with prudence in mind, we introduced that low bar a little bit earlier than I would like. And there is a fine tune between introducing it too early and accruing fatigue that you don't need, or introducing it too late and losing a bit of that skill specificity. In this case, I think we introduced it perfectly, hence the massive progress in the low bar. But it is something to be conscious of in your own training. Now, moving on to the bench press. The bench press was pushed in a moderately straightforward fashion. If you've ran any of the Sika programs in terms of the bench press program or the powerlifting program, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about here. We kept it pretty straightforward, nothing crazy, straight sets across all of our exercises until the peak. So this goes for the high bar squat, this goes for the low bar, the deadlift, and the bench press. We never went for any heavy singles or drop off. There was no real auto-regulation in Jamie's training until a bit of pain arose later in the block, which we'll touch on in a minute. But in this case, the bench press was straight sets all the way across. We started with pretty high volume at the start. We started pretty light as well. We started at working sets at 115, 120 kilos. We did one regular bench press, so no pause. We ran one pause session and then one close grip session, and this remained pretty much the same all the way throughout. Now, Jamie was pretty good at transferring his regular bench press to the pause bench press. There wasn't a major issue in terms of weight or technique, so this was very useful for me as a coach to be able to push these numbers. Now, you might say, would it be better not to focus on just doing pause bench press? But the use of a regular bench press with a bounce, for example, or lack of pause is very, very useful because we're getting the same range of motion, but we're also getting some heavier weights than we would get in the pause bench press. And pretty far out from competition, this does have benefits. So you'll see that while you could do a block of paused only and you'd get some benefits if their programming is intelligent, but in regards to really pushing that number further, you will get some benefit from that heavier weight moving. It's not a one-to-one ratio of pauses benefit you this much. If you move that heavier weight with the regular unpaused bench press with a bounce, you will see good transference to your pause. And in general, you'll see a better block than if you just ran paused bench press. Now, in terms of technique, we actually brought Jamie's grip in closer. So generally, this is idea in powerlifting that if we're competition maxing, we're going to want to obey the rules as much as possible, or rather push the rules as far as possible. Some people refer to it as cheating within the rules, which is a reasonable stance to take. You want to win, but that super wide grip isn't always a massive benefit. A lot of times lifters will benefit closer to this vertical shin angle, or a lot of times lifters will benefit from this vertical forearm angle here, so are closer to it. So the wider we get, while we are reducing the distance the barbell has to travel, we're also reducing our leverages, and this doesn't always pay off very well. So we brought Jamie's bench press in closer. We also changed from a just barely touch and go pause rep to a sinking style repetition. So we've talked about this before, where a lot of lifters, generally as they get towards the heavier classes, I'm talking 90 plus kilos, with a bit more mass in the upper body, you'll see a lot of the time they'll benefit from sinking those repetitions, pausing in that sink, or when they're doing their touch and go, sinking the repetition into the chest a little bit, as opposed to just barely touching the top of the chest. Now, leverages don't really account for anything here. I haven't seen a consistent style of anatomy that lets me know that someone's going to be better with a pause rep or someone's going to be better with a touch and go rep. In this case, it's usually lifter dependent, and it'll be pretty obvious which feels better. So we brought that grip in and we moved to that paused deep position where we sank the bench press in a little bit closer and saw obviously some massive results there. Now, one extra note on this, while we were doing, of course, some assistance work like the close grip bench press, technically the bounced or unpaused bench press as an assistance exercise, we also supported this with dumbbell bench press. Now, I won't yet put my flag in the ground here, but do note that I've found that in lifters' preparations, especially if they're benching a lot and they're stronger benchers, dumbbell bench pressing seems to keep pain away from the shoulders quite consistently. I think it's probably a stabilization aspect, it's probably that unilateral training, and probably a bit of a deeper range of motion, which I think the shoulders benefit from. I'm starting to notice a trend in the last few years that the benefit from the dumbbell bench press largely comes from shoulder health rather than any major assistance exercise. Look, at the end of the day, benching 45 kilos on a dumbbell bench press is nice, but it's not really going to move the needle in terms of transference to weight. So this assistance exercise seems to play really well in regards to shoulder health. And we didn't see any issues with Jamie's shoulders here, even though he had dislocated shoulders before from swimming. Moving on to the deadlift, Jamie had some technical issues in his deadlift that were issues that I really wanted to address. One of them was largely a shin angle that was returning to perpendicular with the floor too early. Now, this is very hard to fix. It can feel quite hard to fix for the athlete, but it is something that pays dividends in the long run. And if you look at that 320 kilos, it is massively beneficial. So what usually happens here is lifters will pull those knees back too early. This will be similar to a clean pull in weightlifting, which is what you want. But in deadlifting, we want to keep that knee angle forward. We want to keep that shin angle forward for a bit longer. Generally what happens to lifters in this case, when they're making this technical error, they're pulling their knees back too early. We're hitting that perpendicular shin angle about halfway up the shin when the barbell has just barely traveled off the floor. And this causes us to basically stiff leg the deadlift. So there's a couple of ways we can focus on fixing this. We started off with 2 deadlift sessions per week. We had a regular deadlift session and we had stiff-legged deadlifts. As the first few weeks on, I saw that this was a technical issue with Jamie's training, so we switched to deadlift with pause plus regular deadlifts. However, it became apparent a couple of weeks after that 2 heavy deadlift sessions per week this close to competition wasn't feasible in terms of fatigue. And also, this particular variation was very fatiguing for Jamie, the pause at the knee. And while it's something he definitely needs to do and will be doing in the future, it's something that unfortunately was too fatiguing in the short term, so we had to remove it. Now, the next best variation is low block deadlifts. Jamie also found these particularly hard, but not as fatiguing. So this is just focusing on keeping that shin angle forward. The pause knee position is better transferred to the deadlift from the floor, but the low block deadlifts give us this kind of secondary benefit of focusing that position. It's not as useful, but it is less fatiguing. To put this in perspective, Jamie ended up finishing on a 280 kilo deadlift triple for a 320 kilo single, but deadlifting 220 kilos for 2 or 3 reps from low blocks initially was very, very hard for him. This will be returned to later. In addition to the high bar squat supporting the low bar squat, the deadlift is also really well supported with this style of deadlifting. The high bar squat transfers really well to this. So we get a really useful plethora of benefits from the high bar squat onto our low bar squat, but we also get it onto our deadlift. If we're very quad dominant and we have a good high bar squat, we're getting a really beneficial training system pushed here. Towards the middle of the block, we went for a heavy single on the deadlift. I needed to see how far a triple would carry Jamie without a peak, so we could get an idea how far a peak might carry him in terms of the deadlift. The bench press didn't need this. Generally, it's quite easy to see how the deadlift will transfer. The high bar squat is something we didn't particularly have time to check out. We need to spend more time working on the high bar squat to get the benefits. So in regards to that, the deadlift went from a 280 for triple, the next week for 320 kilos for a single. Now, towards the end of the block, about the last 4 or 5 weeks, the same knee that had the surgeries a couple of years before unfortunately experienced quite a bit of pain. It was slowly building over the block. We were paying attention to it. We were doing our soft tissue work. We were looking at our mobility. But ultimately, these are massive weights Powerlifting is always sore. You're going to get hurt somehow. If you're pushing your powerlifting block really far, something is going to start hurting. And in this case, Jamie's knee was quite sore towards the last few weeks of the block. Fortunately, we were able to rehab it quite well to get back to a place where we could do the low bar in competition. It was still somewhat sore, but Jamie was tolerable of the pain and didn't feel like we were making it any worse. So we made a call to essentially load the low bar squat as appropriately as we could. Luckily, this happened at a point where we'd done so much work with the low bar so far, and we'd done some work with the high bar, a lot of work so far, that I knew that if we could just get to the competition with a reasonable amount of pain or really little pain, we could still pull off that big squat, because essentially the work had been done. Now, obviously, this was in contact with Jamie. He was telling me how he was feeling. There was obviously a line where I would make a call and say, look, I don't think we should do the competition. But in this case, it rehabbed quite quickly, reasonably quickly. It obviously wasn't a major issue. It was a short-term issue that will need to be addressed later, but we were able to get back to that kind of heavier low bar squatting. We got some 310 kilos for a triple after that, and then we were able to get to the competition for a single. Now, we weren't able to get a lot of volume in before or in between that, which is fine because it worked out okay in the end. But after this, a couple of weeks before the competition, I'm talking 3 or 4 weeks, Jamie was at home and he sneezed, and essentially his back exploded. Now, I suspect, looking at it from this angle, it was probably an issue with the knee. So we have a little bit of a hip shift away from his sore knee, and I suspect this probably put a lot of pressure on his low back in regards to his low bar squatting and his deadlifting. So we probably saw a bit of load that was beyond the tolerance from his low back, and as a result we saw quite a bit of pain from there. So we'd done our 320 kilo deadlift. It was pretty easy, almost a sub-maximal single. And then as we were training, several weeks later, we saw this issue arise. And basically, we had to go from not being able to bend over to hitting this 300 kilo deadlift in competition. Now, Jamie attempted a 315 kilo deadlift in the competition, but the judging was pretty harsh and they said he didn't lock it out, which is fine. You're not going to question judges, not going to complain about it. If it didn't count, it got red lights. It didn't count. 300 was the number on the day. We were both very, happy that he was able to do any deadlifting and squatting or benching at all, considering the back pain. So from here, we essentially just had to regulate the load as much as possible. Jamie would say, how will you feel? And I would say, okay, I need you to deadlift somewhere between 150 kilos and 270 kilos, because we were so close to competition, but we were also in a stage where it might be totally fine, or 150 kilos could move off the floor and there was no way any more was going to move. And in those sessions with remote coaching, we just had to play and based off Jamie's intelligence while he was training and rely, and hopefully they made some great decisions, which he did. So thankfully we ended up in the competition doing very, very well. At the same time, soft tissue work, a lot of dry needling in particular for Jamie, helped hugely with this. He felt instant relief in pain, freeing of those movements. Now, before you attack me about soft tissue work, before you attack me about dry needling, whatever you believe the mechanism to be beneficial, I don't particularly care what it is right now. I know there's a lot of arguments in regards to the neuromuscular therapists, physiotherapists, anyone in that realm, researchers, a variety of different people have different arguments for and against it. I see it to be very beneficial with some athletes. Sometimes soft tissue work is better. Sometimes dry needling is better. Sometimes electrostim is better. To be honest, for me, it doesn't matter as long as we're getting the results. Whether this is neuromuscular in nature, whether there's some physiological changes, I don't particularly care right now until a more concrete answer comes out. But in the meantime, Jamie saw a lot of relief with this dry needling, and as such, we'll continue with that for the foreseeable. So competition really well, very, very happy with the results. 330 kilo squat, 300 kilo deadlift after not being able to deadlift about 4 weeks beforehand, and the 200 kilo bench press. While I certainly think he was capable of more, given how easy the 210 was, I'm pretty happy that 200 kilo landmark was hit at this competition. So overall, a very good competition. Some things to work on. From here, Jamie will just be working on a lot of single leg work. We're going to be building up some tolerance for his low back, giving his knee and his body a chance just to recover from that particular style of training, that really intense training block, and will remain so for the next 3 to 4 months until the end of the year, because he needs a chance for his low back to recover. We need a chance for his knee to recover and hopefully improve beyond that and give a bit of a non-specific GPP phase. So this will look like lots of deadlift with pause at the knee, front rack reverse lunges, toes to bar, Cossack squats. So general athletic movement that hopefully will help Jamie tolerate a little bit more movement issues in the future, and so hopefully then in the next training block we won't see those issues. But again, I do have to stress that if you're pushing your powerlifting blocks far, and as many of you watching this probably know, something's going to start hurting, and the mitigation of these is a big part in the art of coaching for powerlifting. So overall, a pretty successful training block. Jamie is 23, so he's, quite a few years of progress left, so hopefully you see some big numbers from him in the future. Hope you enjoyed today's video. Check out the Sika Strength app on iOS and Android for your own powerlifting program, bench press program, deadlift program, squat program. There's a low bar specific squat program coming out in the coming weeks, so do keep an eye out on that. Sign up to the newsletter at sikastrength.com if you want to stay on top of the programs being released.